Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
All conflict is based in fear. So my wrong view of myself produces in me fear. I'm in internal conflict because of it. And a person who's in internal conflict can't produce peace.
That's more from Jamie Winship. And yes, you have found part 2. Waiting for the second part of this episode because we just weren't able to get to all of it a couple weeks ago. So Jamie agreed to stick around. I'm so thankful for it. Let's dive right in. It's part 2 with Jamie Winship because you have so many good stories. It's not my fault that I had to ask you back. It's your own fault for having so many gorgeous stories to tell. We left off on the last episode with you talking about the way that God gave your son his identity and how God has better blueprints for us than we could ever have for ourselves. And so that's where I want you to speak a little bit more to. You say that, I spend so much time trying to keep my kids safe. I've got 3 kids and my brain is just always like, where are they going to be? Even my daughter just got her license and I let her drive, but I've only followed her. I've followed her to the mall.
Oh my gosh.
And you're helping me. Your book is helping me realize that's a low level of safe. Mm-hmm. That's a low view of safety. A higher view of safety is what you say, which is if you can teach your kids to hear from God and know who they are, they can go anywhere.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting in the different places where we took our kids. As a parent, when you're at baby dedication service, one of the things that we want to be careful to do with the Lord is when you dedicate your child to the Lord, what you're saying to the Lord really is kind of like Hannah. In the Old Testament, when she's giving that child to the Lord. She's giving that child to the Lord. And when you dedicate your son or daughter to the Lord, you're saying, Lord, I am here to steward this identity to become all that you have for this beautiful person that you knit together in their mother's womb. And wherever they need to be, Lord, I commit to helping them get there. But a lot of times what happens in our culture, this is a whole other topic to talk about some other time, is we're doing more of an animistic thing with God. And we're just saying, God, if I dedicate this child to you, will you make sure nothing bad ever happens to him? And that's a whole different mentality. And that's what you're doing then is you're actually trying to protect your kid from what God might do. And in doing that, we actually hurt them. We actually harmed them. Instead of entrusting them to God and saying, God, as this child starts to discover the amazing depth of who they really are, would you make them fearless in pursuing it? And then what we're going to do as parents is model that fearlessness so that they won't learn to be fearful, because all fear, other than the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises, all fear is learned fear. And so that means you can unlearn fear, which is great. But so in my own children, as they were growing, my wife and I would observe what they were afraid of and realize either they learned that from us to be afraid of that, or they learned it from someone else. And so we have to help them understand fear and how to work through fear. Fear is beautiful. Fear is helpful. It keeps us sober-minded and wakes us up to wrong thinking and wrong decisions. But it's not a decision maker. Fear is not the decision maker. It's a warner, like an engine light flashing. It's just saying you need to pay attention to the way you're thinking about this right now, or the way you're going, or where you are at 3 a.m. Pay attention to this and make a decision about it. But fear is not the decision maker. When fear becomes the decision maker, then you lead a life of self-protection and self-promotion, which is the opposite of what God has made you to be. So
you have 2 stories. I'm going to ask you to tell both, your decision on what order you want to tell them in, but they both involve God's protection. The first is with your buddy who you called Jason Bourne, and so you know that story. Yeah. And the second is when you actually had fear get in the way And so you took some time and you met with the Lord and he showed you something, but both have a similar piece to the story. So which one do you want to tell first?
Well, let's see. I'm going to make sure I know both stories because I've been with Jason Bourne in a lot of different scenarios. So you might have to remind me which.
It's the one where they set out four place settings.
So my friend, we'll call him Jason Bourne. He's a operative for the U.S. and really talented. And anything you would think about Jason Bourne is this is what this guy is. They're real people. There really are people like this. They're super smart and they're very sophisticated people. And anyway, he had come to something. I was speaking at I was doing a lecture in Washington, D.C. on counterterrorism and things like that. And he came up to me. He's younger than me. And he said, and I think this is important. He said, I want to know if you're the real deal, which I really respect that question and I said to him, what does that mean? And he said, I want to know if you're the real deal because anyone can stand up and tell stories, he's exactly right. I love that. And I said, well, I can tell you I'm the real deal, but that wouldn't make any difference, would it? You'd have to come with me and see for yourself, right? Because people can't do what they've never seen. That's what modeling is for. And discipleship is doing things in front of people, letting them see God work in ways that then they can start to move into it. This is parenting and everything else. So I said, why don't you come with me? And why don't you come with me to the place where I go that's the most intimidating to me on a project I'm working on? So he agreed, and it's a big deal for him to go into a country because he's considered an act of military aggression by himself. So if a country discovers him in their country and they don't know ahead of time that he's there, it's considered an act of war by the U.S., if you can believe that. One guy. Anyway, so we work it out because it was in another country. So he and I go, and it's a difficult journey to get to this location where we're going to work. And it's a counterterrorism scenario. And where the place where we go is it's a refugee situation in the Sahara Desert, and it's been there a long time. It's all built on violence and warfare. But so we get out there, and I told him when we were going in, I said, listen, when we get in there, we have to go in at night for different reasons. I said, but when we get in at night, they'll come out and meet us in the desert and they'll walk us in. And, we're unarmed and all of that stuff. So we just have to trust God, how it's going to go. So we go in there, but I said, when we go in there, they're going to tell us where to sleep in these, big Bedouin tents. And the next day when we wake up, they'll have set a table for us on the ground. You sit on the ground, and they'll have plates. It was me and him and a Pentagon official was with us, three of us. They'll have plates for us, and we'll eat. And then they'll come in later, and we'll start the process of all the stuff we're going to do together, trying to get them to opt out of Islamic terrorism. And so we get up the next morning, we go into the other room to eat, and there's 4 place settings instead of 3, there's 4, and we sit down. Well, he's super observant of everything that's going on all the time. And he said, why are there 4 place settings? Is there someone else coming in here? And I said, no, I'm pretty sure no one else will come in here until we're done. But I don't know why there's 4. He says, has there ever been 4 before? And I said, no, I don't know why there's 4. I'm telling you, I don't know. So every meal that we eat, and their custom is to let you eat by yourself. It's considered impolite to watch your guest eat. So they always would set the food in a room, and we would eat, and then they would come in when we were finished. And so it was always this extra place setting, and it would drive him crazy. And it was funny because the MIT guy, he was a Navy commander. He didn't care. He could care less. It's interesting, the different identities. But he was consumed with the detail of what was going on. And so after, several days with them and this going on, we're with the men, the leaders of this tribe. And he said, I'm going to ask him about the extra plate. And I said, okay, whatever. Well, in the meetings that were in there, because he and I have gone in there since this time, but it's very tense. And there's always a segment of the group that we're meeting with that want to kill us. I mean, they talk about it nonstop while you're there. It's very nerve-wracking when you're in these meetings, and there's at least 2 of the 12 leaders saying, let's just kill them right now. They're U.S., they're spies, let's just kill them right now. It's a constant chatter that you hear when you're among them. So we're in these pretty tense meetings, and we're unarmed, and we are in the middle of nowhere, and they constantly move. So you can't really sit there and think about, are we safe or not? You just can't think that way. And you'll see why in a second. You just learn not to think that way. But you have to have a reason not to think that way. You can't talk yourself into it. So we're in this evening meeting with them, and Jason Bourne's like, he says, hey, because he all of a sudden he was fluent in their language. They speak Hassaniya where we were. And I'm like, how do you know their language? And he said, I know their language. And I said, when were you going to tell us? He said, I don't know. Never thought about telling you. He's like that everywhere we go. Everywhere I've ever been with him, he's suddenly fluent in their language, but he's like that. And so he's in Hassaniya, he says to them, he says, can I ask you about why there's 4 place settings when we eat? And they said, they thought it was an odd question. And they said, well, because there's 4 of you. And he looks at me, and I just shrug. And the Pentagon guy didn't even care. He's not even interested in the conversation. He was there. He was thinking of something else we were working on there. And so Jason Bourne says, well, what do you mean there's 4 of us? Like, there's 4 of us? And they're like, yeah, there's 4 of you. And he's looked at me, and then I know what they're saying because I've had this happen to me before in other places. But I just thought that this is going to drive him. This is going to really astound him when he figures out what this is. And so he says, okay, he said, there's 4 of us. And he said, they said, yeah. And he said, are there 4 of us here now? And they laughed at him, and they said, no, your other guy's out, the one outside, the one that stands outside the door. And he said, there's a guy outside the door. And then they realized that we can't see the 4th guy. Like, they figured that out. And so among themselves in Hassaniya, they're using the word malaikat, which means angel. So they're saying, oh my gosh, their guy is an angel. And that's what they're saying among themselves. And it's causing this stir among them. And then Jason Bourne can hear him saying that, but it doesn't click with him. Like, why are they saying that? So he's asking him, he says, what does the other guy look like? What does our other guy look like? Does he look like us? And they said, he looks like you, but he's bigger than you guys. He's bigger than all 3 of you guys. He's big, and he's outside. He's your security guy. He stands guard over you all night long at your tent. Isn't that your security guy? And then they started saying, Malaika Allah. It's an angel of God, that you have an angel of God. And they said, that's why the guys that don't like you here won't bother you, is because of your security guy. So everywhere we were walking, there was this 4th person with us, and he was bigger than us. And they asked us, they said, we wanted to ask you why your security guy has a sword. He has this amazing sword. And then Jason Bourne was like, our guy has a sword. And he was all impressed by the fact that our guy had a sword. And so that night when we we're back alone in our part of the camp. Is pitch black out there. Jason Bourne whispers to me, and he says, how many people or how many creatures do you think are with us? And I said, I don't know. Who knows? But it was like, seeing the angels and seeing the chariots of God with Elisha. And it was that kind of scenario. And then so because of that, then Jason Bourne character, there was other things in his life he wanted to talk about, but he didn't want to talk to me about them until he knew that I was the real deal, that he didn't want to ask me really personal questions about himself until he really believed that God was really active in my life. And then he started confiding things in me, and we've become lifelong friends because of that. But that was.
I would imagine the situation that would definitely spark a lifelong friendship. That moment right there.
Yeah, it was very beautiful. It was a beautiful time for that.
It ties in for. I like this story because you write a book called Living Fearless, and this is what you talk about, and yet. I was grateful to hear that there was a moment, a little bit, where you actually struggled with it. Yeah. And I liked hearing how you came out of it, what you asked God and what he revealed to you.
Mm-hmm. So there was a time, the time I got in the car with the guys. Is that what you're thinking about?
Ooh, no, I've never
Let
heard
me tell
this
you that.
one.
Okay.
This was one.
Okay,
Okay, good. This is going to be a
because it
newbie.
came up.
I'm ready.
So after that scenario with Jason Bourne, so I was working by myself in a Middle Eastern country. So we had been in Iraq, and in Iraq, just to show you the level of fear that I do have to deal. We all have to deal with fear. None of us are impervious to fear, even on just a daily basis about our kids. Because my oldest son spent 5 years in Iraq and then into Afghanistan. And, I didn't love that either. I prayed a lot for him, that son. And then now one of my sons is an FBI agent and he works, dicey stuff. So as a parent, I struggle with it too. And they're like, Dad, you're the one that taught us how to do all this stuff. So why are you nervous about it? But so when we were in Iraq, I was a team leader in Iraq, and the senior part, our team was divided into two sections, a senior and a junior team. And the senior team all were killed in one day. The whole team was killed in one day. So that had happened. And then, that's a tough situation. And you have to go ID all the bodies and you have to contact all the relatives and all that. It's very difficult. And these were senior people. They knew what they were doing. They made a mistake. They were all killed. And so that next year, we were working in another country, and I was by myself in this scenario. And the ones that were killed were in a car. It was a situation involving a car. They were in a car and they all killed in the car. So I was working in this situation, and my job was to make contact with this certain individual who was wanted by different governments and to get him to come out from leading these groups. And so I had made contact with the guy. He was not a super nice guy. And one of his lieutenants was with him when I finally made contact with him. And so I'm in the city. I had made contact with him the day before. That night, I'm out on the street waiting for a taxi to go home, and this car pulls up. And in the car is the guy that I'm looking for, the driver and two guys in the back seat. And they pull up, and the guy that I'm looking for rolls down the window and he says to me, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm just going home. I'll see you guys again tomorrow." And they said, "Get in the car. We'll give you a ride home." And I knew they knew who I was, and I knew who they were. And you do not get in the car ever in these situations. However, I made the mistake of asking God what he wanted me to know and do. So immediately my training is, you don't get in that car, you walk away. We just had a whole team killed months before. And so it was easy for me. I was like, no, I'm not getting it. I said, no, thanks. I'll wait for a taxi. I don't want to inconvenience you guys. And they got out of the car. Two guys in the back seat got out and said, no, we insist that you come with us. And so I asked God, do you want me to get in the car? And immediately I knew the answer was yes, get in the car. But I didn't want to get in the car. And so I had this debate going on. And I was backing away from the two guys. And I had this thing going on inside of me like, I don't want to get in the car. Should I get in the car? And I was, by this time in my life, I know the voice of God. I know what it sounds like. I don't debate it. Anyway, so I knew the Lord wanted me to get in the car. And so I said, okay, I'll go with you guys. So I get in, and they put me in the back seat between the two guys, which is the worst possible place to sit in a car. If you're in a car, is in the back between the two guys. So they get in the car and they say, "Where do you live? Where do you live?" And I sit up that way, and they made a U-turn and they drove the opposite direction. And then is when you're, the danger of just shifting into the reptilian brain and just reacting. So I know how to get out of a car like that. We train how to get out of those cars. It's violent, but you can do it. And that's the next thing in my mind is, okay, I'm going to get out of this car. Because they went through the city and out into the desert. And I knew, man, if we're going out into the desert, this is going to be bad. And they drove out into the desert, and the guy, but the practice is of the present, staying in the present tense. You can't let your mind even get 30 seconds forward in the future, because you'll start guessing what's going to happen. And once you start guessing, then you're operating in what may not be true. right? And this is where the lie-based thinking starts. It's out of control. God can't help you now. You're in trouble. You made a mistake. It's all like that really quick. And you have to keep pulling it back into the present and just saying, God, what do you want me to know right now? And he would just say, you're okay. Don't go 30 seconds into the future. Stay right in the present tense, right in the present. And the guy in the front seat turns around and he looks at me and he said, we know who you are. We know what you're doing here. And we're taking you out into the desert and we're going to put you on trial. And we're going to execute you in the desert. And he said, what do you think of that? And I thought, oh my gosh, what do I think of that? And I asked the Lord, what do I think of that? What do I think of that? And it was really beautiful. There was just this calm sense of tell him, this is what was in my mind. Tell him you're not afraid of him and that you want to be his friend. And I thought, but neither of those are true. Those are both lies. I am afraid and I don't want to be his friend. I don't like him at all. But the Lord said, just speak it as if it's true. This is what faith is. Faith is the substance of things you hope for. It's the evidence of things not yet seen. Just say it, speak it as if it were true, which is really beautiful. And I said, okay, I'm not afraid of you. And as soon as I said it, I felt less fearful. Just as soon as I said it. And then I said, and actually, I'm here to be your friend. And then I kind of hoped I could be his friend. It was really interesting. It's like God speaking creation. It's like when he says it, it comes to be, right? And so I said, and as soon as I said it, just something changed in the car. It was like there was a power shift in the car. It was like almost like it got lighter. It was at night, but it got lighter. And he looked back at me and he smiled and he said, oh, you're not afraid of me and you want to be my friend? And I said, yeah, I think I do. I think that's true. And he said, okay, all right. They turned the car around. He said, we're going to take you back to your house. He knew right where I lived, of course. And he knew that my wife was with me in the city. He said, we're going to take you back to your house and we're going to drop you off. And tomorrow night, I'm going to send a car and a driver and you get your wife and you both get in the car and go wherever that driver takes you and trust that we don't kill both of you. If you want to be my friend and you're not afraid, do that to show me that you're not afraid and that you want to be my friend. Trust me with the life of your wife. So they took me back and dropped me off. And so I go in and my wife, Donna, she's like, how was your day? And I said, oh yeah, it was interesting. And I said, we got a dinner invitation for tomorrow night. And she said, where? And I go, well, it's going to be a surprise, I think. But then I told her the scenario. And so I said, you have to decide. I said, this guy could absolutely kill both of us. I'm telling you, he's known for it. But I think it's the right thing to do. But, you decide. I'm going to go, but you decide me. She's her own. So she prayed, we thought about our kids and all that stuff. And then she decided, no, I think we should go. So the next night the car came and we went and got in the car and the driver was there and he got in and he just drove us straight up into the mountains. Also not a great place to go, straight way up into these mountains. And we just held hands and we were just like, Lord, this is what we've been doing our whole life. And so to live as Christ and to die as gain, and we'll just see where this goes. But we feel like this is your invitation, Lord. And if you're doing the inviting, why would we say no? No matter what it is, why would we say no to you? We're not victims. And so anyway, he drives us up to this villa in the mountains and we get out of the car and it's the guy and his entire leadership team and their wives, all of them. There's the entire group of leadership. And so we go in there and Donna goes off again. So remember, my wife is Jewish. This is an Islamic fundamentalist gathering. And so she goes off with the women and I go off with the men. And through the night, both of us walked those people out of false identity into true identity. And I have a picture here also on my wall of in the morning, when the sun was coming up, we stayed all night. When the sun was coming up, the guy that said, I'm going to kill you, he went over to a fire and he cut off a leg of lamb and he knelt down in front of me. And this is the picture I have of him. He knelt down in front of me with a leg of lamb and he held it in two. He served me. And he said, I'm so glad that you weren't afraid of me and that you wanted to be my friend. And when we ate together, he disbanded his team. They stopped fighting. And the only other time I've ever seen him is I was walking through the airport at Istanbul and he was coming the other way. And he just walked past me. We just looked at each other and smiled and just passed. He's completely withdrawn from any violence because of that night we had. And we talked about identity and God and faith. And so, there's just those times where you just trust God. Yeah. We called it seeing Jesus. Our team calls it seeing Jesus. If you look around and you see, whenever we're in a situation where we think we might die, we always say, does anyone see Jesus? Because if we see Jesus, we know it's over. And like, it's okay, we're done. We're going home. He's here to get us. And if we don't see Jesus, we all just say, wow, this is going to hurt. This is going to hurt, but it's not going to, we're not going to die. So, yeah.
Well, wow. I mean, I feel like that's really the only response to so many of your stories is wow. And then, in our final little bit of time here together, we've built upon all these stories, but you even just ended that one with, you led them all through false identity into their true identity. So let's talk about that for the remainder of our time together. Someone might be listening going, my identity, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I volunteer, all those things, but you're talking about something so much deeper. So go ahead and share a little bit more. When you say identity, what do you mean? And how does someone begin to find out what theirs truly is?
So identity is the essence, if I can say it like this, it's the essence of the I deep within you, grounded and rooted in love. It's always, your true identity is grounded in love. It's sourced in love. And it's to be discovered in community through your lifetime. It's the most beautiful thing about you. See, even when I'm looking at you, like I see you, but I'm like, there's this identity that I'm looking at that's so that even you don't know it all, right? And so to be friends with you would be this amazing journey of part of my identity, and friendship with you would be to draw your identity out. And your identity would draw my identity out. And this is how community, but it's drawn out in love, not in competition, not in comparison, in love. Like there's a part of you that's super valuable, and it would be valuable to know you for my good, and vice versa. And this is how the body's supposed to work together. So that's the true, and knit together by God in your mother's womb, unique, never done before, never done ever again. The false identity is just simply, it's coping mechanisms in response to trauma in our life, whatever kind of trauma. Any trauma is relative to a person. It could be you did poor on a spelling test, or you're severely abused. Whatever the trauma is, you develop a view of yourself based in the trauma. You develop like, I'm not enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, I'm unseen, all of these things. And then you develop coping mechanisms to deal with the trauma. Again, not bad, they're just coping mechanisms, but they limit you. And those coping mechanisms will continue through your lifetime until they're addressed. They'll let you survive, but they won't let you thrive. So you'll live, the false identity will constantly self-promote and self-protect. That's what it does until it's made well or made whole, and then you don't need it anymore. And so that's just the difference between the true and the false. So just think of all through Scripture, God walking people into the truth of who they are. Gideon's one I use a lot of times when I'm working with high school kids. It's like, Gideon is a mighty man of valor. He was born a mighty man of valor. He's always been a mighty man of valor, but he thinks he's a coward and he thinks he's a victim. So he lives like one until he has an interaction with the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord God will only speak to you in your true identity. He can't and won't speak to our false identity. And so Gideon's like, I'm the least, I'm the worst, I'm the poorest, like that. And the angel of the Lord won't speak to that identity because it's not true. He says, go in the strength you've always had and liberate this country. And so when I'm talking to people, my goal is to talk to the true them. So they can identify themselves to me as I'm a Muslim fundamentalist or I'm an evangelical Christian. Like those are just gang names. They're not identities. They're just names of groups that we're in. And I want to talk to the real you. And the real you, those men in that camp were little boys who had lived traumatic lives and were afraid and angry. That's all they were. And only they were now 40 years old. And I just walked them back into the truth with Jesus. And as soon as they knew who they really were, they were free not to fight anymore. And so that's the identity process. And Christ is always inviting us into the truth of who we are with the truth of who he is and the truth of who my neighbor is. Love God, love your neighbor in the same way you love yourself. Those are all knowing the truth of each one.
And the reason this works in conflict is what?
Because all conflict is based in fear. All conflict is based in fear. And the fear is based in a wrong view of yourself, of the person's wrong view of themselves, right? So my wrong view of myself produces in me fear. And I self-protect and self-promote, which starts in, I'm in internal conflict because of it. And a person who's in internal conflict can't produce peace. They can only produce conflict, right? So out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So when I'm talking to a person that already feels like they're not good enough, that person's in conflict internally. And until that conflict is resolved, the most they can do is have kind of a tenuous relationship with another person, but mostly there's a lot of conflict involved. And so you just see it in the schools. You just see the constant, and in our culture, is constantly in conflict. We don't know what peace is in our culture. I mean, we can't even have a discussion about any topic without people getting really upset. That's because of their own internal conflict. Once they understand the beauty of who they actually are, as made by Christ, you just don't need the fight anymore. You can just let the other person be who they are and you be who you are, and let's do this together.
And that's just one of the reasons you say that your identity is the gift that you give to this world. Final thoughts?
Yeah. No, and that's like when I'm even just meeting you, I want to know that part of you. Like I'm not content just to meet a person and have some kind of superficial, you're a gift to the world. I want to know what your gift is to the world because it's valuable to me, right? It has a value to me and my journey. And so when we get in a room that's at conflict, it's really beautiful to walk them into true identity. And then they start giving the gift of who they are to each other. And it resolves conflict. It's stunning to watch, but Jesus is doing it all the time in the Gospels with people. So much to think
What's
about.
the name that he calls you?
Untier of.
What does Jesus call you?
He calls me the untier of knots. And so I have this brass knot that someone gave me as a gift. And they said, this is what you do. You come into situations that are knotted into terrorism or whatever, and your identity unties the knot. And once my identities untied the knot, then the other identities on my team, they give their identities in, and it's the whole healing and wellness of the other. I just do one little part, but we all do little parts.
Well, our conversation should have come with a disclaimer because it is impossible to hear these 2 episodes and not be changed because it hits that truth receptor like a bullseye. Yeah. All of a sudden, now your soul's like, you feel it, you know it.
Yeah.
Already some of that false identity is bubbling up and the Lord is lovingly saying, let's deal with this. I've got something more for you. Right. And really, this conversation is the entire reason I felt compelled to start the Passion Meets Purpose podcast. I just didn't have some of this language. So thank you for helping us have more language. Jamie's book is called, is it Living Fearless or Living Fearlessly? Is there a Lee?
No, it's Living Fearless. Yeah. Fearless. Living Fearless.
Okay, Living Fearless. His website is Identity Exchange. And we'll link it all in the show notes. Jamie, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's nice to meet you.
Don't you just wish that it could go on for hours? I do too. Wow. Well, actually, it can if you grab Jamie's book, Living Fearless, or if you hop on over to identityexchange.com. They've also got personal one-on-one coaches that you can find. So if you are looking for that name that God calls you, that unique name that Jamie was talking about, he's going to help walk you through it. He and his wife, Donna, and their team over at identityexchange.com, which is clearly linked up in the show notes. I would love to hear how these past 2 episodes have impacted you. I would love to hear what you're thinking about it. So please, would you contact us? There's various ways to do that, and we'll link up to that as well. on purposely.com is what hosts this podcast episode, and I would just love to hear. So thank you so much. Thanks to Terra Firma, Scott Caro, Rebecca Beckett, Luke Swanberg, and we will see you in 2 weeks.